The screaming started before anyone understood what was happening. 6 men in black tactical gear pushed through the front doors of Meridian, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, and within 4 seconds, every exit was blocked. The maitre d' was shoved face first into his podium, a wine glass shattered against marble, and in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of what had been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening, Victoria Ashford, 30 years old, CEO of a $2 billion technology company, the woman whose testimony had dismantled one of the most powerful criminal networks on the eastern seaboard, looked up from her dinner and realized with cold, absolute certainty that she was going to die tonight. Then a kitchen worker in a stained apron stepped through the service door, and everything changed. If this kind of story moves you, stories about quiet people who do extraordinary things when the world stops looking, subscribe to this channel right now. Every week we bring you cinematic narratives of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that finds you when you've stopped searching for it. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city and country you're watching from. We read every single one, and there's nothing quite like seeing how far these stories travel. Now stay with us, because what happened inside Meridian that night is only the beginning. The reservation had been made under a false name, which was standard procedure. Victoria Ashford's security team had swept the dining room at 6:47 p.m., checked the kitchen staff, confirmed the private corner table near the rear windows, and declared the location clean. By 7:15, Victoria was seated with 2 of her senior vice presidents, Daniel Cho and Patricia Wells, reviewing third-quarter projections on a tablet propped against the breadbasket, a glass of sparkling water untouched at her elbow. She didn't drink at business dinners. She barely ate at them either. 12-hour days had a way of compressing every human need into something she could schedule around, and dinner was usually 40 minutes of conversation she could have handled over email. The Harman acquisition still has 3 regulatory flags, Daniel was saying, scrolling through something on his phone. Legal wants another 2 weeks minimum. Legal always wants 2 weeks, Victoria said. Tell them they have one. Patricia glanced up. You sure about that? If they rush it and something gets missed, then we deal with it when it comes up. Victoria reached for the water glass. We've been sitting on this deal for 4 months, Pat. 2 more weeks turns into 2 more months. You know how this goes. It was an ordinary conversation, the kind she had a dozen times a day. She was already thinking about the call she needed to make at 9, about the emails she hadn't returned, about the stack of contracts on her desk back at the office. She was not thinking about the 6 men moving through the city toward her sab. The first indication that something was wrong was the sound. Not shouting, not yet. Just a sudden, collective stillness that rippled through the dining room the way a stone disturbs still water. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. A fork clinked against a plate and wasn't picked up again. The ambient noise of Meridian, soft jazz from the corner, the murmur of 40 simultaneous conversations, the steady rhythm of a high-end restaurant in full service, simply stopped. Victoria looked up. The 6 men came through the front entrance in a single coordinated push, and the efficiency of it was what struck her first. Not fear, not confusion, but the cold professional recognition that this was not random. They moved like people who had rehearsed. 2 broke left and sealed the side exit near the bar. 2 more went right, covering the main corridor to the restrooms. The 5th man positioned himself at the entrance, his back to the street, watching the room. And the 6th, the one who was clearly running this operation, walked straight toward her table. He was big, not especially tall, but wide through the shoulders, with the kind of physical density that came from years of intentional conditioning. He wore no mask. That, more than anything, told Victoria exactly how serious this was. People who wear masks intend to leave. Victoria Ashford, the man said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room had gone absolutely silent. You're going to stand up and come with me right now. Anyone who moves gets hurt. Anyone who reaches for a phone gets hurt worse. Daniel started to stand. Hey, wait, just... The man's hand shot out and caught Daniel by the collar, wrenching him sideways out of his chair and dropping him hard onto the marble floor without breaking stride or changing expression. Patricia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a scream. Around the room, guests had frozen mid-movement. A man halfway to his feet, a woman with her hand pressed over her mouth, a couple near the window who seemed to have simply stopped existing. Victoria's 2-person security detail, both of them seated at a discreet table near the entrance, had their hands up. Both of them were already looking down the barrel of a sidearm held by the man stationed at the door. 4 years of building a security protocol, 6 figures spent on personnel, training, equipment, and it had taken these people less than 10 seconds to neutralize it completely. She stood up slowly. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Okay, I'm standing. Just don't hurt anyone else." The man gripped her arm. "Assum." In the kitchen, no one had heard the exact words, but everyone had heard the silence. Kitchens run on noise. The hiss of the grill, the clatter of sheet pans, the controlled chaos of 8 people moving in a space designed for 4. When the dining room went quiet in the way it had, the head chef, a small, fierce woman named Rosa Gutierrez, had muttered something under her breath and started toward the pass-through window. The man at the prep station nearest the door didn't move toward the window. He moved toward the door itself. Logan Mercer had been filling in at Meridian for 11 days. The regular maintenance contractor had thrown his back out, and Logan had taken the call from the staffing agency at 7 in the morning and said yes, mostly because the timing worked. Ethan's school schedule, the aftercare program, the fact that it was only 3 days a week. The pay was decent. The commute was manageable. He'd been doing similar work for 2 years. Maintenance, handyman jobs, occasional kitchen prep when they needed an extra body. He was good with his hands and he kept his head down and he didn't talk about himself, which meant that after 11 days, the kitchen staff at Meridian knew his name was Logan. He took his coffee black, and he was good at fixing the temperamental dishwasher on the back wall. That was all they knew. He was 37 years old. He had a son named Ethan, who was 8 and currently at the aftercare program at PS 147 in Brooklyn, where he was almost certainly arguing with someone about Lego architecture. Logan had packed him a lunch that morning: turkey sandwich, apple slices, the little bag of pretzels Ethan liked, even though he claimed he didn't. He had a dentist appointment on Thursday that Ethan already knew about and was already constructing elaborate reasons to reschedule. Logan was thinking about none of this as he pushed through the kitchen door. He was reading the room the way certain people read rooms. Not consciously, not analytically, but in the automatic full-body way that gets trained into a person through years of high-stakes environments where reading wrong means dying. He took in the positions of the 6 men in 1.3 seconds. He understood the tactical formation in another second after that. He identified the threat levels, the angles, the distances, the state of the room's occupants. He did not announce himself. He did not raise his voice. He did not give the man holding Victoria's arm any indication that anything unusual was happening until he was close enough that the distance no longer mattered. What happened next lasted 6 seconds by the count of 4 different witnesses who were interviewed afterward. Rosa Gutierrez described it later, to the police and then to a journalist and then, eventually, to her sister over the phone, and each time she described it differently because her brain kept trying to process it into something that made sense and kept failing. It was like watching someone who knew exactly where everyone was going to be before they got there, she said. He didn't hurry, he just moved, like it was choreographed, except nobody else knew the choreography. The man holding Victoria's arm was the first. Logan hit him in a specific point on the side of his neck, not a punch exactly, more precise than that, and caught him as his legs buckled so the fall didn't make noise. He had Victoria's arm free before she fully registered what was happening. The second man, the one nearest the bar exit, started turning. He made it about 45 degrees. The third and fourth men, covering the corridor, were not quick enough to coordinate. The fifth man, stationed at the entrance, got his weapon up. Logan was not where the weapon was pointing. The sixth man, the one who had thrown Daniel to the floor, was the last one standing, and he was good, genuinely good, trained in a way that the others hadn't been. And he and Logan exchanged 4 rapid, brutal seconds of contact that sent a table skidding across the marble and broke one of the wine glasses that had survived the initial invasion. He went down hard. 6 seconds, 6 men. All of them unconscious or incapacitated on the floor of Meridian's dining room. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Victoria stood with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, breathing. She was looking at the man in the stained apron who had just dismantled a professional extraction team in the time it took most people to read a text message. He was checking the room. Not her room. The room. Doorways, windows, the people frozen at their tables. His breathing was controlled. He had a small cut on his left forearm that was starting to bleed through the apron fabric, and he noticed it with the same casual attention someone might give a minor inconvenience, then looked away. "Is there a back exit?" he said. He was talking to Rosa, who had followed him out of the kitchen and was standing near the pass-through, one hand over her mouth. "What?" she said. "Back exit, loading dock, service entrance, anything that doesn't open onto 5th. Yes, loading dock through the prep room, left past the walk-in." He nodded. He looked at the two security men who were getting to their feet near the entrance, slightly dazed but uninjured. "You two. Don't let anyone in or out the front until NYPD arrives. Keep everyone seated, keep them calm, tell them help is coming." He looked at the nearest guest, the man who'd been halfway to his feet, and said, "Sir, can you call 911? Tell them 6 men attempted an abduction at Meridian on 5th. All 6 are down. No fatalities. Tell them you need units immediately." The man nodded like he'd been given a lifeline. Logan turned to Victoria. She was staring at him, up close, and she was close now, within arm's reach. She could see that he was breathing harder than he'd let on, that his hands had a slight tremor that he was controlling through stillness, and that his eyes were already moving past her toward the exit. He was not basking in what he'd just done. He was not checking to see if she was impressed. "I was thinking about the next problem." "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, because it seemed absurd not to say it, "Who are you?" "Logan." He was already moving toward the kitchen. "Come on. Whoever sent them is probably monitoring communication channels. We need to be somewhere else before the second wave figures out the first wave failed." She followed him. The loading dock behind Meridian smelled like garbage and diesel and cold air coming off the street. It was not the kind of environment Victoria Ashford typically found herself in. Her coat was still on the chair in the dining room. She was wearing a silk blouse and heels she'd paid more for than some people paid for rent. She stood on the dock and watched Logan pull out a phone that was 2 generations old at minimum and make a call. "Danny?" he said when someone picked up. "Yeah, it's me. I need a favor. I'm at the service entrance of Meridian on 5th. I need a pickup in the next 10 minutes. 2 people. Yeah." A pause. "I'll explain later. Just come to the loading dock. Don't use the app." He hung up and looked at her. Victoria had run a $2 billion company since she was 27. She had sat across from venture capitalists who had tried to acquire her company for parts, from prosecutors who had asked her to testify against people who were actively threatening her life, from board members who had wanted to remove her before she'd had a chance to prove herself. She was not a person who was easily unsettled. She was unsettled now. "A second wave," she said. "You said they'd send a second wave." "Probably." He was scanning the alley in both directions. "Whoever organized this, that kind of operation costs serious money. They're not going to write it off because round 1 didn't work. They'll regroup, assess, and try again." He glanced at her. "You knew this was a possibility." It wasn't a question. "I knew there were people who were angry," she said carefully. "After the testimony. The FBI told me there might be residual threats." "Residual threats?" He said it without inflection, but something in his face shifted. 6 trained operators with coordinated positions, and an identified target is not a residual threat. That's a contracted hit with organizational backing. He looked at her more directly. "What exactly did your testimony take down?" The night air was cold. She had goosebumps on both arms and was not going to mention it. "The Veltri network," she said. Elliot Veltri ran a fraud and money laundering operation out of 3 shell companies, 2 of which were buried inside legitimate tech acquisitions. One of them was buried inside my company. I found it. I reported it. I testified for 11 days. She paused. "Veltri is in federal custody. His organization lost over $1 billion in seized assets." Logan was quiet for a moment. "And the organization itself?" he said. "The people who actually ran the operations. Not Veltri specifically. The infrastructure." She knew where he was going. "Not all of them were arrested." "Right," he said. He didn't seem surprised. "That's who sent those 6 men." In Brooklyn, at PS 147's aftercare program, Ethan Mercer was in the middle of demonstrating to his friend Marcus why the Lego bridge he'd designed was structurally superior to Marcus's version, when his supervisor, Ms. Chen, came over and said his dad had called to let them know he might be a few minutes late. Ethan received this information with the calm acceptance of a child who had learned that his father's timeline was sometimes approximate, and returned to his structural argument. He had no idea what had happened at a restaurant in Manhattan. He had no idea that somewhere across the East River, his father was standing in an alley waiting for a pickup, bleeding slightly from a cut on his arm, assessing the situation of a woman who was about to become a very complicated problem. He had no idea that the next few weeks would change everything. He just knew his bridge design was better, and that his dad would be there when it mattered. He always was. The car arrived 12 minutes after the call. It was a dark blue Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and a pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror. The driver was a man in his mid-40s named Danny Kowalski, who took one look at Logan, one look at Victoria, and said nothing except "Get in." Logan got in the front, Victoria got in the back. The car pulled out of the alley and into the stream of midtown traffic. "Hospital?" Danny said. "No." Logan pressed the edge of the apron against his forearm. "Your place?" "Marie's home with the kids." "That's fine. 20 minutes?" "If the bridge cooperates." Danny glanced in the rearview mirror at Victoria. "Friend of yours?" "New acquaintance," Logan said. Victoria, who had not been spoken to or about by anyone as a new acquaintance in approximately 5 years, found herself without a response for possibly the first time she could remember. Outside the window continued being Manhattan, indifferent and luminous, and entirely unaware that anything unusual had happened inside one of its nicest restaurants. People walked fast on the sidewalks. Yellow cabs surged through intersections. The city did not pause for the small dramas unfolding inside it. Victoria looked at the back of Logan Mercer's head, the close-cut hair, the set of his shoulders, the way he was already watching the mirrors, and tried to calculate what she knew about him, which was almost nothing. His name was Logan. He worked in kitchens. He had a son. He had just put 6 men on the floor of Meridian without raising his voice or taking a hit that slowed him down. She didn't know what he'd been. She didn't know what had brought him to a prep station in an apron when he was clearly something else entirely. But she knew, with the same instinct that had made her a good CEO, the ability to assess a situation and see where the weight actually sat, that whatever came next, he was the most important person in the room. She just didn't know the room yet. She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes for exactly 30 seconds. It was a technique she'd developed in her mid-20s, 30 seconds of stillness to reset, to stop the adrenaline from becoming noise, to let her brain catch up to what her body already knew. Her body knew that she was alive. Her brain was starting to understand how much that was going to cost. Danny Kowalski's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Greenpoint that smelled like old radiator heat and someone's cooking, garlic, and something with tomatoes. And when Marie opened the door, she took one look at Logan's arm, said, "Kitchen now," and didn't ask a single question about the woman standing behind him in a silk blouse that cost more than their monthly grocery budget. That was Marie. She had a gift for absorbing the unexpected without making it anyone's problem. The kitchen was small and bright with a yellow light fixture that buzzed faintly. Logan sat at the table and let Marie clean the cut on his forearm with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had patched up her husband's construction injuries for 15 years and was not going to be dramatic about a kitchen knife versus whatever had actually caused this. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. Victoria stood near the doorway to the hall, still holding herself with the posture of someone accustomed to occupying a room, but her arms were crossed in a way that was less authority and more self-containment. Danny set a mug of coffee in front of Logan without asking and looked at Victoria. "You want something? Coffee? Water?" "Water, please," she said, and then, because she was not entirely without self-awareness, "Thank you. I'm sorry for the intrusion." "You're not intruding." He filled a glass from the tap and set it on the counter near her. "Logan doesn't bring people here, so if he brought you, there's a reason." From the back bedroom came the low sound of children's voices, 2 of Danny's 3 kids still awake at 9 on a Tuesday, which seemed to be a point of ongoing negotiation in the Kowalski household based on the brief, firm exchange that drifted through the wall. Marie taped a bandage over Logan's forearm and announced she was dealing with that situation and disappeared. Danny sat across from Logan. He was a big man with a beard that had gone gray at the edges and hands that were marked up from years of working with them. He and Logan had served together for 2 years, not the same unit, overlapping deployment. And the kind of trust that built between people in those circumstances didn't really have a civilian equivalent. You either had it or you didn't. How bad was it? Danny said. 6. Professional. Coordinated extraction attempt. Logan turned the coffee mug in his hands. Contracted, not opportunistic. Someone with organizational money and access to trained operators. Danny was quiet for a moment. You burned your cover. I wasn't running a cover. I was washing dishes. Same thing, for you. Danny looked at Victoria. Someone really wants you dead. Yes, she said. I had gathered that. It wasn't sarcasm. It was just the flat acknowledgement of a person who had been operating under a level of threat. She'd partially understood and partially chosen not to fully examine, and was now being asked to look at it directly. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, and she registered briefly how wrong she looked in this kitchen, and then let go of caring about it. The FBI told me the risk was manageable, she said, after Veltri's arrest. They did a threat assessment, concluded that without his direct leadership the network would fragment, that the priority targets for the remaining infrastructure would be asset recovery, not retaliation. Logan looked at her. Who did the assessment? An agent named Corrigan. He'd been the lead on the investigation. And you believed him? I had no particular reason not to. She paused. I believed the parts that were convenient to believe. I know that. There was an honesty in that which Logan hadn't expected. He'd seen people in high-stakes situations before, people who had resources and power and had never genuinely felt physically endangered. And the usual response was denial, or anger directed outward, or a kind of brittle bravado. She wasn't doing any of those things. She was sitting in someone's kitchen in Brooklyn with her arms on a table that had a ring stain on one corner, and she was being straight about the fact that she'd looked away from something she shouldn't have. The Veltri network didn't fragment, he said. That's what those 6 men tell me. A fragmented organization doesn't contract professionals for a coordinated extraction at a monitored location. They might throw a brick through a window. They might send threatening emails. They don't run a multi-point tactical operation with abort protocols. He'd seen the way the 5th man had pulled back from his position the moment Logan neutralized the 3rd and 4th. That was trained response, not improvisation. Someone is still running a coherent command structure, and they've decided that whatever you know, or whatever they think you know, is worth significant resources to eliminate. Victoria's water glass was still on the counter. She hadn't moved to get it. There was a second layer, she said, after a moment. Danny glanced at Logan. In the financial data, she continued. During the investigation, the prosecutors focused on what they could prove and prosecute quickly. The Veltri shell companies, the laundering routes through the tech acquisitions, the direct fraud. I testified to all of it. But there was a secondary network of accounts, transfers moving through an offshore structure that the prosecutors said was outside their jurisdiction and would take another 18 months to untangle. She looked down at the table. I don't know where that money went, but I know approximately how much. Somewhere between $300 and $400 million, moved through at least 6 relay points in the 6 months before the arrest. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint buzz of the overhead light. They think you know where it ended up, Logan said. I think they think I documented it more thoroughly than I actually did. I handed over everything I had, but everything I had was enough to suggest I'd gone deep enough that I might have found the endpoint. She finally looked up. I didn't, but I understand why they'd assume otherwise. Logan sat back. The chair creaked under him. So it's not just retaliation. They're also worried about exposure. Both. Probably in that order. She picked up the water glass at last and drank. I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder to understand the full picture of the threat before tonight. Yes, Logan said. You should have. Danny raised an eyebrow slightly. It wasn't the diplomatic response. Victoria blinked, and then something in her face shifted. Not offense, but something closer to relief at being spoken to without the cushioning that money and position usually put between her and honesty. Okay, she said. Okay. Logan stood up. I need to get Ethan. The shift was immediate and complete. The man who had been assessing threat intelligence at a kitchen table was suddenly a father who was 45 minutes late to pick up, and the two things existed simultaneously in him without apparent conflict. He pulled out his phone and called the aftercare supervisor at PS 147. and his voice changed. Not softer exactly, but differently focused. "Hey, Ms. Chen. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I got held up. I'm on my way. Is he—" "Yeah. Yeah, okay. Tell him 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Danny. "Can you—" "I'll drive you." Danny was already reaching for his keys. Victoria stood up as well. "I'll arrange a car. I have— my assistant can—" "Your assistant's phone is probably monitored," Logan said. "Your car service has your account information, your address, your regular routes. Don't use anything that's been connected to your normal pattern." He said it without heat, just fact. "Danny can drop you at a hotel. Pay cash, use a different name. Tomorrow morning, before 9, I need you to compile a list of every person who knew you had that reservation tonight. Every person. Staff at your company, whoever made the booking, your security team, anyone who might have overheard. Can you do that?" She stared at him. "You think someone in my circle tipped them off? 6 men with a coordinated plan don't show up at the right restaurant on the right night because they're psychic." He pulled the apron off and dropped it on the table. Under it, he was wearing a plain gray shirt with a small tear at the shoulder seam. "Write the list. Don't contact anyone on it until I've seen it." He was heading for the door. Danny had his jacket. "Logan," she said. He turned. She looked like she was going to say something significant and then didn't. "The hotel," she said instead. "What name should I use?" He thought for a moment. "Whatever name you can remember easily under stress. Something from before you were anyone." She nodded. He left. She stood in the yellow light of Danny Kowalski's kitchen for another few seconds, listening to the muffled voices of children being put to bed, feeling the particular strangeness of being in a space that was entirely ordinary and entirely outside her life. Then she reached for her phone, the personal one, not the work one, and started writing a list from memory. She was good at memory. It was one of the things that had made her dangerous enough to be worth killing. Ethan was asleep by the time Logan got him into the car, which was both a relief and typical. The kid could sleep anywhere. Logan had watched him fall asleep sitting upright at a baseball game, at a birthday party that was by any measure too loud for sleep, once on the floor of a hardware store while Logan was returning a drill bit. He'd inherited that from his mother, that absolute unconscious trust in the world, the willingness to just let go. Logan carried him up to their apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Carroll Gardens and put him in his bed without waking him, and then stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at his son's face in the ambient light from the street lamp outside. Ethan slept the way he did everything, with his whole body, one arm hanging off the mattress, mouth slightly open, completely committed. He was 8 years old. He liked Lego and pasta with butter and a specific cartoon about robots that Logan had watched with him 40-some episodes of, without ever fully understanding the plot. He was missing his left front tooth, which had finally come out 2 weeks ago with great ceremony and a small amount of blood, and Ethan's sincere astonishment that it hadn't hurt more than it did. He had his mother's dark eyes and her stubborn jaw, and Logan's tendency to go quiet when he was processing something hard. He was the only mission Logan had anymore, and the thought of anything, just any of it, touching that apartment, touching that sleeping kid, was the one thing that could still get past the wall Logan had built between himself and the version of himself he used to be. He closed the door halfway and went to the kitchen and made himself eat something, leftover rice and whatever was in the fridge, standing at the counter, and then sat down and opened his laptop. It took him 40 minutes. The video was everywhere by then. Someone in the dining room at Meridian had filmed it on a phone. Of course they had, because that was the world. And the footage showed 37 seconds of compressed, efficient violence that had already been viewed 900,000 times and was climbing. The angle was bad, taken from under a table, shaky, but it was clear enough. You could see the 6 men. You could see Logan move through them. You could see him talking to the kitchen supervisor afterward and guiding Victoria toward the back. You couldn't see his face clearly, but clearly enough. The comments were what he'd expected and worse. People calling him a superhero, people making jokes, people demanding to know who he was, news accounts speculating, a post from someone who claimed to be a former military contact, wrong, Logan didn't know the person, saying he recognized the techniques. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of the apartment with his hands flat on the table and thought about the fact that by morning his face was going to be on the front page of every major outlet in the country, and about the list Victoria was writing in a hotel room somewhere in Manhattan, and about a secondary network of $400 million moving through relay points that no one had fully mapped. And he thought, with the specific exhaustion of a man who had spent years outrunning a version of himself, that the thing he'd been most careful to avoid had just found him anyway. Well, by 7 the next morning, his phone had 43 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, 6 from Danny, and 2 from a number he hadn't seen in 3 years that belonged to a man named Garrett Solis, who had been his commanding officer and was currently doing something in the private security sector that Logan had deliberately never asked about. He called Danny first. "The footage," Danny said, before Logan could speak. "I know. It's everywhere. They're calling you the Ghost, capital G, like it's a name." "That's a terrible name." "I know that, you know that. The internet has opinions." A pause. "Garrett called me too. He wants to talk to you." "I know." Logan was standing at the kitchen window watching Ethan eat cereal at the table behind him, reading something on the tablet Logan had bought him, used at the beginning of the school year. "Tell him I'll call him after 9. "What are you going to do?" Logan watched his son eat cereal. Ethan picked up each piece individually when he was almost finished, with his spoon, which was inefficient and took forever and was entirely characteristic. "I don't know yet," he said. He did know, he just hadn't said it out loud. He dropped Ethan at school himself that morning, which he didn't always do. The school bus was perfectly reliable, and Ethan was fine on it, made friends on it, did not need his father to personally walk him to the door. But Logan walked him to the door and watched him disappear inside, and stood on the sidewalk for an extra 30 seconds, just confirming what he already knew, which was that the building was unremarkable and the block was ordinary and nothing was watching. Nothing was. Not yet. I was 3 blocks away when his phone rang with the number he didn't have saved but recognized. Not Victoria's regular number, a different one, new, which told him she'd gone out and bought a prepaid that morning. Good instinct. "The list," she said when he answered. "I have 22 names, but there's one that concerns me more than the others." "Tell me." "My head of corporate security, a man named Reed Calloway. He's been with me for 3 years. He's the one who coordinated the advanced sweep of Meridian last night, confirmed the location was clear, gave the all clear at 6:47. A beat. He also managed the communication protocol for my testimony scheduling. He was one of 5 people who knew the date and location of every prosecutor's meeting during the Veltri case." Logan stopped walking. A woman with a stroller moved around him on the sidewalk without looking up. "Where's Calloway now?" he said. "He texted me last night at 11 saying he was sorry about what happened and was working with NYPD on the investigation." Her voice was controlled but flat, in the way that meant she was working to keep it that way. "He was not at Meridian when the attack happened. He was supposed to be coordinating my security detail from outside the restaurant. He told me earlier in the day that he'd be running oversight from the car." "But your detail inside was only 2 people." "Yes." He said the location was secure enough that a larger footprint would be conspicuous. Logan started walking again. "Has NYPD been in touch with you directly?" "A detective named Okafor called this morning. She wants to meet." "Meet with her. Tell her everything about the attack itself. Don't mention Calloway or the list until I've had a chance to run some checks." Silence. He could hear street noise on her end. She was outside, or near a window. "You don't trust the police?" she said. "I don't trust contaminated information channels. If Calloway was passing information to the network, we don't know how far that goes. One compromised person in a security structure usually doesn't mean one compromised person." He turned onto a quieter street. "Meet with Okafor, be cooperative. But be careful about what you say regarding your own internal team until we know who else might be connected." Another silence, longer this time. "You said we," she said. He hadn't noticed he'd said it. Figure of speech. Was it? He didn't answer that directly. "I need 2 days to check some things. Keep your schedule as normal as possible. Don't disappear. Don't change your patterns dramatically. If Calloway or anyone else in your organization is reporting your movements, an abrupt change tells them something shifted. You want me to act like nothing happened. I want you to act like what you are. A CEO who survived an attack and is cooperating with law enforcement, not someone who's running a parallel investigation with a kitchen worker she met 12 hours ago." A A pause. Can you do that? She made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, and then wasn't. I run a company of 600 people, and I've been doing it since I was 27. I think I can manage a performance. Okay. Logan. Her voice shifted. About Calloway. If it turns out he's the one who... She stopped. He's been in my office. He knows my schedule, my home address, Ethan's. He knows things about the people around me. If he's been feeding that to someone who wants me dead... I know, Logan said. That's why I said 2 days, not a week. 2 days. He hung up and stood on the sidewalk and thought for a moment about Reed Calloway's face, which he'd seen twice in the background of the Meridian footage he'd watched the night before. Once during the advanced sweep, visible through the front window, standing outside, looking at his phone, not looking at the perimeter, not watching the approaches, looking at his phone. Garrett Solis had a voice like the inside of an old warehouse, big and slightly echoing and not especially warm. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. I figured you'd be in touch eventually, he said. Didn't think it'd be because someone put you on the front page. I didn't put me on the front page. No, you put 6 people on a marble floor and someone else put you on the front page. Semantics. Logan heard the sound of a chair. Something shifted. You're going to need help. Possibly. Not possibly. You went from invisible to the most talked about face in the country in 12 hours. Whoever ran that operation last night is already reassessing. They know the extraction failed. They know why. And now that your face is public, they know exactly what they're dealing with. A pause. They're also going to start wondering how deep your involvement goes. Whether you're just a bystander who got unlucky, or whether you're actively working against them. I'm just a bystander who got unlucky. You stopped being that when you made the call to engage instead of locking the kitchen door. Garrett's voice was steady, not accusatory. I'm not criticizing. I'd have done the same thing. But the choice has consequences, and you know it. He did know it. He'd known it standing over 6 unconscious men on a marble floor before the dust had settled. He'd known it in Danny's kitchen. He'd been knowing it all morning, the way you know something that's settled into your body before your brain has finished arguing. I need background on a man named Reed Calloway, Logan said, head of corporate security for Ashford Technologies. Employment history, financial records, if you can get access. Any flags in his background that a standard corporate screening would miss. You think he's the leak? I think he had position and access and was where he wasn't supposed to be when it mattered. Logan turned back toward the subway entrance. I also need to know who's running the remnant of the Veltri network. The FBI's working theory was fragmentation. That theory is wrong. Fragmentation would be convenient for a lot of people, Garrett said. Organized continuation is a different kind of problem. A beat. You're getting back in. I'm not getting back in. I'm dealing with a specific situation. That's what getting back in sounds like from the outside. Garrett. I know. He could hear the other man shift again. I'll make some calls. Give me until tonight. And Logan, whatever you're doing, build in cover for the kid. These people already knew your target's schedule and security setup. If they dig your identity up through the footage, I know, Logan said again. He did know. And he hated that he knew, because it meant there was a version of the next few weeks in which Ethan became a variable in someone else's calculation. And that was the one thing, the only thing, truly, that could make him feel afraid in the way that fear was supposed to feel. He took the stairs into the subway 2 at a time and found a seat in the last car and rode back toward Carroll Gardens, thinking about a list of 22 names, a man with his eyes on his phone instead of the perimeter, $400 million in an account no one had fully traced, and the specific sound Victoria Ashford's voice made when she was trying to hold something together that was already threatening to come apart. I was a kitchen worker. That was what he was. He sat with that for the length of the ride, knowing it was getting less true with every stop. She called again at noon. He was in the middle of researching Calloway through publicly available sources, court records, professional registrations, financial disclosures from his previous employer, a mid-sized private security firm out of Chicago that had dissolved 4 years ago under circumstances that were murky enough to be interesting. The detective, Victoria said. Okafor. She told me something. He waited. 2 of the 6 men have been identified. Both are former military contractors. Both have known associations with a man named Carl Maddox. He ran operational logistics for Veltri. He was arrested in the initial sweep but released on a procedural issue 3 weeks ago. Her voice was tight. Corrigan, the FBI agent who told me the threat was manageable, he processed Maddox's release. The paperwork went through his office. Logan stopped typing. Okafor told you this? He said. She was careful about how she said it, but yes. A breath. She also told me, off the record, that she'd been trying to flag the Maddox release for 5 weeks and kept hitting walls. What kind of walls? She didn't specify, but the word she used was jurisdictional, which in my experience means someone above her pay grade decided not to look at something. Logan looked at his screen. Calloway's previous employer had dissolved after a federal investigation into a contract dispute with a mid-level government defense contractor. The investigation had been closed without charges. The lead investigator on the closure had been an FBI agent named Corrigan. He sat very still for a moment. Victoria, he said, cancel your afternoon. Tell your office you're working remotely. System issue. Anything plausible. Go somewhere you haven't been in the last 6 months. A coffee shop, a library, somewhere with exits. Don't take your regular driver. What did you find? I'm not sure yet. I want to be sure before I tell you. He was already closing browser tabs and opening new ones. But the word manageable is starting to look like something someone chose very deliberately. She didn't argue. Didn't ask 3 more questions. She said, okay, and hung up. And he found himself briefly, involuntarily impressed by that. By the ability to hear something alarming and respond to it cleanly, instead of needing to process it out loud first. Outside, the afternoon was turning gray. Through his apartment window, he could see a strip of the sky between buildings, heavy and low, the kind of sky that made a promise and didn't specify when it intended to keep it. He thought about Ethan, who would be getting out of school in 3 hours and 20 minutes. He thought about the dissolved Chicago security firm and an FBI agent's name appearing in 2 separate places it had no business being. He thought about 6 men on a marble floor and the fact that he had made a choice, standing over them, that couldn't be unmade. Then he pulled up a new search and kept working. Garrett called back at 8:47 that evening with the kind of voice that meant he'd found something he wished he hadn't. Logan was at the kitchen table with Ethan's homework spread between them. 3rd grade math, which was mostly addition and subtraction with the occasional word problem that Ethan approached with the focused suspicion of someone who had been personally wronged by trains leaving stations at different speeds. Ethan had his tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth, which was what he did when he was concentrating, and Logan had been watching that without meaning to for the last 10 minutes. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. Calloway's clean on paper, Garrett said. Which is the first problem, background like his. 15 years in private security, multiple high-profile clients, not a single flag. That's either genuinely clean or it's been managed. The Chicago firm is the interesting part. They dissolved in 2021. The federal investigation you probably found was officially about contract fraud. What it was actually about was a subcontracted intelligence operation that got too close to a domestic target. The case got buried. 3 principals from that firm went into private consulting afterward. Calloway was the 4th. Where did the other 3 land? One's legitimate. One's in Cyprus, which is suggestive. The 3rd one, a pause, the kind that meant Garrett was choosing his words. The 3rd one turned up in a financial disclosure connected to a holding company that has a verified relationship with Maddox's pre-arrest operational structure. Logan leaned against the hallway wall. From the kitchen, he could hear Ethan erasing something with significant force. So Calloway came out of an organization that had at least 1 member with verified ties to the Veltri network, Logan said. That's the conservative reading. Garrett paused again. The less conservative reading is that the Chicago dissolution wasn't a firm going under. It was a restructuring. People dispersing into positions where they'd have access and cover and deniability. Calloway landing as head of corporate security for the woman who then destroyed Veltri's operation isn't coincidence. It's placement. The word landed with the particular weight of something Logan had already suspected but hadn't wanted to fully shape into a sentence. He wasn't just a leak, Logan said. He was inserted. 3 years ago, before the investigation, before Victoria Ashford had any idea what was buried in her company's acquisitions. Garrett's voice was flat and steady. They put someone next to her before she even knew she was a target. Once she became one, he was already in place. Logan looked at the ceiling of the hallway. There was a small water stain in the corner that he'd been meaning to report to the building super for 6 weeks. Corrigan, he said. Yeah, your FBI agent. His name comes up twice in the Chicago dissolution records. Once as the investigator who closed the case, once in a communication log from the holding company's legal team. Not a smoking gun, but the kind of coincidence that stops being a coincidence after the second time. He cleared Maddox 3 weeks ago. I know, I saw that too. A long exhale. Logan, this isn't a remnant operation. This isn't disorganized retaliation from a broken network. Someone rebuilt. Or maybe they never broke in the first place. Maybe Veltri was the visible part, and what's underneath him is still intact and still running, and now very motivated to clean up anyone who might eventually find the 400 million. In the kitchen, Ethan called out, Dad, what's 47 minus 19? Work it backward, Logan called back. What do you add to 19 to get to 47? A pause. 28? Yeah. Oh. The sound of pencil on paper. That's actually easier. Logan turned back to the wall and lowered his voice. I need Maddox's location. That I don't have. He's not on any registered address since the release. Could be using a third party, could be out of the country. He moves carefully. Another pause. What are you planning? I don't know yet. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Logan pushed off the wall. Can you get me 2 people? Discreet, experienced, not connected to anything that touches this case. I need eyes on Calloway's movements, and I need someone watching Victoria Ashford's residential building without her security team knowing they're there. That's a specific ask for someone who doesn't have a plan. It's preliminary. I'm thinking out loud. You don't think out loud. You think privately for a very long time, and then you act. Garrett was quiet for a moment. I can get you Marcus Teal and someone he trusts. He's been doing executive protection work for 2 years. He's solid, and he owes me a complicated favor. Tell him I'll explain the parameters when I meet him. I'll make the call. A beat. Logan, this is bigger than one woman's security problem. You understand that? I understand it. If Corrigan is compromised and Maddox is operational and there's 400 million in untraced funds still moving somewhere, this has federal implications that go beyond what you can manage with 2 surveillance assets and whatever you've been pulling off public records. I know that too. So at some point, Logan agreed. Not yet. Right now, I don't know who I can hand this to without it getting back to the people I'm trying to get it away from. When I know that, I'll know what to do with it. He paused. Get me Teal. Give me 4 days. He went back to the kitchen. Ethan had finished the math sheet and was now drawing something in the margin of his notebook that appeared to be a robot fighting a dinosaur, which meant the homework was actually done, and he was just avoiding announcing it because announcement led to bed. Logan sat down across from him. You done? Logan said. Ethan looked at the robot, looked at Logan. Almost. Ethan, the robot needs legs. The robot can get legs tomorrow. Pack up. Ethan packed up with the theatrical resignation of someone who had lost a negotiation he hadn't technically entered. He shoved everything into his backpack and then looked at Logan with his mother's dark eyes, which had a way of seeing through things that Logan still wasn't entirely used to, even 8 years in. Are you okay? Ethan said. I'm fine. Why? You were in the hallway for a long time. He picked up the backpack. And you get a face when something's happening. What face? Ethan considered. Like you're doing math, but it's not the kind on paper. Logan looked at his son for a moment, 8 years old, missing a front tooth, one shoe untied, and apparently able to read him like a billboard. I'm fine, he said again. Go brush your teeth. Ethan went. Logan sat at the table with the empty homework papers and the low hum of the apartment and thought about 4 days, and about whether 4 days was enough, and about the particular arithmetic Ethan had described. The kind that didn't go on paper, that you carried in your chest and worked through in the dark. He didn't sleep much that night. He met Victoria the next morning at a coffee shop in Windsor Terrace that she'd never been to and had no known connection to. She came in wearing clothes that didn't look like her, dark jeans, a plain jacket, hair pulled back, and he understood she'd made some effort to not look like herself, which was smart, but only partly successful, Because Victoria Ashford had a way of occupying space that clothing didn't change. She moved like someone accustomed to rooms adjusting around her, which was not something you could put on or take off. She sat across from him, and he told her about Callaway. He told her clearly, and without softening it, because she'd shown him she could handle directness, and because there wasn't time for anything else. He told her about the Chicago firm, the dissolved structure, the third colleague with ties to Maddox's operation, the placement 3 years ago. He watched her face as he said it, and she didn't flinch exactly, but something behind her eyes went very still in the way that people go still when something they feared has been confirmed. 3 years, she said when he finished. Approximately. He was at my company Christmas party. He came to the opening of our Seattle office. She was looking at the table. He knew my assistant's daughter's name. He asked about her recital. A pause. He sat in on the meeting where we first flagged the anomalous transfers in the Veltri acquisition. I remember thinking he was thorough, asking good questions. He was thorough, Logan said. That's the job. She looked up. Knowing all of that and saying that with a straight face. I'm not defending it. I'm describing it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee. Callaway needs to keep thinking his position is intact. If he suspects you know, he reports that upward, and whoever's running this adjusts their approach. Right now, the one advantage we have is that they don't know what we know. So I keep pretending. For now, yes. He paused. Can you manage that? With him specifically? She thought about it, actually thought about it, which he appreciated, because the easy answer was yes, and the true answer required more than a second. I've been managing a board of directors who wanted me gone for 2 years while acting like I trusted their input, she said finally. I think I can manage one man who thinks I'm oblivious. Different kind of performance. Same skill set. She picked up her coffee. What else? He told her about Corrigan, about the communication log, the pattern of appearance, the Maddox release. As he talked, he watched her process it, watched the CEO part of her brain, the part that ran on data and pattern recognition, working through the implications faster than most people could have followed his explanation. The FBI is compromised, she said. One agent, provably, possibly more. I don't know the scope. But I can't go to the FBI. Not through official channels, not yet. And the NYPD detective, Okafor. She seems clean. She's been trying to flag Maddox for 5 weeks and getting blocked, which suggests she's working against the current rather than with it. He looked at her steadily. But I need to be careful about what I hand her and when. One wrong move and it gets back through channels to Corrigan, and then we lose the only lead we have into how deep this goes. Victoria nodded slowly. You said 4 days. I said I needed 4 days. This is day 2. What happens in the remaining 2? I find Maddox. She set her cup down. How? Callaway is reporting to someone. Every intelligence asset in the field has a contact protocol. Regular check-ins, drop points, something. If I can get access to Callaway's communication patterns without him knowing, I can find the upstream contact. From there, finding Maddox is a matter of time. Getting access to his communications without him knowing, she repeated. Is that something you can do? Not alone, he paused. But I know people. She looked at him for a long moment. The coffee shop was filling up around them. A man with a laptop, a woman with a stroller, the ordinary morning traffic of a neighborhood going about its business. Logan looked like he belonged here, she thought. The worn jacket, the careful way he watched the door every time it opened without appearing to watch it. He'd chosen the seat with his back to the wall and the full sight line to the entrance, which she'd only noticed after she sat down. Logan, she said, why did you get involved? At the restaurant. You could have locked the kitchen door. He looked at the table. It was the first time she'd seen him look somewhere other than at her or at the exits. A man was getting ready to drag a woman out of a room against her will, he said. That's not something I can watch happen. A lot of people watched it happen. I know. What made you different? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to answer that without it sounding like something it isn't. Try. He turned the coffee mug in his hands. I spent a long time in situations where acting or not acting had consequences that didn't just land on me, where the choice to step back because it wasn't your problem meant someone else paid for your restraint. He paused. I stepped back from that life because I had Ethan, and I couldn't keep doing it and be the kind of father he needed. But stepping back from a job and stepping back from a specific moment in front of you, those are different things. He looked up. I looked at that man's hand on your arm, and I was already moving. The thinking came after. She held his gaze. The thinking that said you should have locked the door. Yeah. A brief, dry, almost smile. That thinking. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad the thinking came second. He stood up and put money on the table. Don't contact Calloway unless he contacts you first. If he does, keep it normal. Ask about the police investigation. Express frustration with the disruption to your schedule. Don't ask about his whereabouts the night of the attack. He pulled on his jacket. I'll be in touch by tonight. She watched him go and sat with the dregs of her coffee and the specific feeling of being in the middle of something that had its own momentum now, something that had stopped being a thing that had happened to her and become a thing she was inside of. She didn't mind that, she realized. What she minded was that she'd spent 3 years with a person who had been watching her on behalf of people who wanted her dead, and she hadn't known, and she'd thought she was good at knowing. She left 20 minutes after Logan by a different exit and walked 4 blocks before getting into a cab, the way he'd told her to. Marcus Teal was 32, built like someone who took physical fitness personally and had the specific economy of movement that Logan recognized from men who'd been trained to not waste anything, not energy, not words, not attention. He showed up at Logan's apartment at 2 in the afternoon with another man named Voss, who was quieter and older and had a scar along his jaw that he'd clearly had long enough to stop noticing. They sat in Logan's kitchen. Ethan was at school. The apartment felt different in the afternoon without him, more like a place Logan just happened to live. And Logan laid out what he had. He put Calloway's photo on the table. Employment history, known vehicle, registered address in Forest Hills. Approximate daily pattern, based on what he'd been able to reconstruct through professional calendars and LinkedIn activity and 2 hours of patient cross-referencing. He put Corrigan's information beside it. Then the holding company connections, the Maddox release paperwork, the communication log fragments Garrett had pulled. Marcus looked at it for a long time without speaking. Voss looked at it once and then looked at Logan. You want Calloway's comms, Voss said. I want his outgoing contact pattern, who he's reporting to and how often. If there's a physical drop, I want the location. If it's digital, I want the routing. That's not a simple surveillance ask. I know what it is. Voss and Marcus exchanged a look that wasn't skepticism exactly, more a shared calibration, 2 people checking whether they were reading the same situation the same way. You were SEAL, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I was. How long out? 4 years. Marcus nodded slowly. Garrett said this is personal. It's complicated. Logan looked at them both. The woman who was targeted at Meridian is in genuine danger from a functional organized network with at least 1 federal asset, possibly more. The threat isn't going away on its own, and the legitimate channels are compromised enough that I can't use them yet. I need intelligence before I can act, and I need to act before they try again. He paused. That's the situation. If that's more than what you signed up for, tell me now. Marcus picked up Calloway's photo and looked at it. Forest Hills, he said. I grew up 2 miles from there. That a yes? Logan said. That's a yes. Voss was already looking at the communication log fragments. Your routing question. If he's using a burner protocol, physical surveillance alone won't crack the upstream contact. We'd need to get close enough to his device. I know. That means proximity access, at least once. I know that too. Logan looked at the table. I'm working on a scenario. Give me tonight. They left at 3:15 and Logan picked up Ethan at 3:40, and they walked home and Ethan talked about a conflict at school involving a disagreement over the rules of a made-up game that 3 kids had invented and now all 3 remembered differently. And Logan listened to the entire thing and asked questions, and somewhere in the middle of Ethan's explanation of why his version of the rules was clearly the correct one, Logan worked out the first part of the scenario. Not all of it, just the first part. The second part came to him at 10:30 that night, standing at the kitchen window with a glass of water, watching the street below. He called Victoria at 11. She answered on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. Calloway's going to contact you tomorrow, he said. He'll say, it's a routine security review, checking your protocols after the attack, wanting to walk through your current residence security setup. He does this periodically. You'd expect it after an incident. Say yes. A pause. You know he's going to contact me tomorrow? I know he's overdue for a contact report to whoever he's reporting to, and I know the most plausible cover for that kind of meeting is a post-incident security review. He's been quiet since Tuesday night, which means he's either spooked or he's been told to wait for instructions. Either way, he needs to reestablish position. Logan set the glass down. When he comes, I need you to give him one piece of specific information. Just one. What kind of information? I'm going to tell you that the FBI has contacted you about a potential safe house, a location outside the city where they're recommending you stay for the next 2 weeks while they work the investigation. I need you to tell him the name of the town, not an address, just the town. Her voice was careful. And the town doesn't exist. The town exists, but the safe house doesn't. If Calloway is reporting your movements, within 48 hours someone will be looking for that location. We track the inquiry back to its source, and we get the upstream contact. Silence on her end. He heard her breathe. You're using me as bait, she said. I'm using false information as bait. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Because you're going to be somewhere else entirely while it happens. Another silence. Where? I'll tell you the day before. I don't want that in your head when you're talking to Calloway. He paused. I know this is a lot to ask. You keep saying that. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just noting it, because I keep asking a lot. Logan. A pause. The thing you said this morning, about stepping back from a life and stepping back from a moment being different things. She was quiet for a second. I've been thinking about that, because I could have stepped back from the testimony. My lawyers told me I could argue material risk to my personal safety, that I had legitimate grounds to limit my cooperation to written submissions, distance myself from the courtroom exposure. I didn't. I sat in that chair for 11 days. Another pause. I told myself it was about the right thing, and it was. But it was also because I couldn't watch what I knew disappear into a process that would take 3 years and maybe produce nothing. I couldn't step back from that specific moment. I know, Logan said. So, we're not that different. He didn't have an immediate answer for that. He stood at the window and looked at the street and thought about the places where she was right about that, and the places where they were different enough that the comparison didn't hold, and landed somewhere in the middle that he didn't have words for yet. Try to sleep, he said. You too. Neither of them believed the other one would. Calloway called Victoria at 9:15 the next morning. Logan knew because Voss was 2 blocks from Calloway's Forest Hills apartment at 9:12, watching, and reported the call going out at 9:15 on a number Calloway had used twice in the past week. Not his registered company phone, not his personal phone, a third device he'd had with him when he left his building at 8:50. The third device was the key. The third device was the one that mattered. Victoria called Logan at 9:18. He called, she said. Security review. He wants to come to the office at 2. Say yes. Tell him you appreciate his diligence. Normal. Normal, she repeated, like she was testing the word. You can do this. No, I can do this. She sounded faintly annoyed at the reassurance, which was the right sound to be making. I'll call you after. At 1:45, Marcus reported that Calloway had left Forest Hills by car, headed toward Manhattan. At 2:10, he was in Victoria's office building. At 3:20, he was back in his car. At 3:47, the third device made a call. Voss had gotten close enough the previous evening, a specific moment in a specific parking structure that Logan didn't need to describe to anyone in detail, to place a passive signal tracker on the third device. Not content capture, just metadata. Who it was talking to and for how long. The call at 3:47 lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds and connected to a number registered to a logistics company in Newark. Logan had the address of the logistics company by 5 o'clock. He also had, by cross-referencing the address against 3 other databases, the name of the man who had signed the facility lease 14 months ago. Carl Maddox. He sat with that for a moment. The afternoon light was going flat outside his window, and Ethan would be home in 45 minutes, and he had found what he'd spent 3 days looking for, and now he had to decide what to do with it. He called Garrett. I have Maddox, he said. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Newark address? Yes? That's an operational base. He's not living there. Another pause. Logan, this is where you stop and hand it to someone. I know. Okafor. Yes. He'd been thinking about Okafor, the detective who'd been trying to flag Maddox for 5 weeks and hitting walls, who had told Victoria, off the record, that she'd been running into jurisdictional blocks, who had, as far as Logan could determine through 2 days of careful background checking, no visible connection to Corrigan or the Chicago firm or the holding company or anything in the network he'd been mapping. Yes, Okafor. And Victoria? Logan looked at the address on his screen. Newark. 14 months. Whatever was in that facility had been in operation for over a year, before the arrest, probably before the investigation had fully surfaced. It wasn't a fallback position, it was a headquarters. She needs to be somewhere else before I hand this to Okafor, he said. Once I do, the response will be fast. They'll know the Newark address is burned and they'll move, and the first thing Maddox will do is wonder how the address got out. He paused. The false safe house information gives us 48 hours before they figure out it was false. After that, they'll know someone fed Calloway bad intelligence on purpose, and they'll come back to Victoria. So you have 48 hours from when she gave Calloway the information. 26 hours now. Garrett exhaled. Where are you putting her? Somewhere I trust, Logan said. He hung up and made one more call, and then he went downstairs to meet Ethan's school bus and walked his son home in the early evening, listening to a detailed account of a science class experiment involving baking soda and vinegar that had apparently exceeded expectations in terms of volume and proximity to the teacher's desk. He laughed at that. A real laugh, the kind that Ethan had always been able to produce in him without trying. Was Mrs. Patterson mad? He said. She said she wasn't mad, but her face was saying something different, Ethan said. Logan held the door open for him. Sometimes that's how you know you did the experiment right. Ethan considered this with great seriousness. I think that's the lesson, he agreed. They went upstairs. Logan made dinner, pasta, the kind with butter that Ethan liked, and a salad that Ethan approached with diplomatic tolerance. They ate at the kitchen table. Ethan talked. Logan listened and answered and was entirely present in the way that he'd learned, after his wife died, was the only currency that mattered in the economy of raising a child alone. Not perfection, not the absence of hard things, just presence. After Ethan was in bed, he sent a text to Victoria with an address and a time. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., a town in the Catskills where Danny Kowalski's brother-in-law had a house he rented in the fall, and that was currently empty. No registered connection to Victoria, to Logan, or to anyone in any database that the network had been shown to access. She responded in 3 words, I'll be there. Then he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and opened the file he'd been building for 3 days and spent 2 hours making it airtight. Every connection, every document, every date and name and address, and communication record. He built it the way he'd once planned operations, not assuming anyone else would fill in the gaps, not leaving ambiguity where precision was possible. When it was done, he read it through once and then saved it in 3 separate locations. Then he wrote a short message to Detective Okafor's department email address, marked urgent, with no name attached. Just a case number from the original Veltri investigation and 3 words, check the attachment. He set it to send in 18 hours. Then he shut the laptop and sat in the quiet and listened to the sound of his building, the pipes, the faint television from upstairs, the street below, and thought about a woman driving toward the Catskills at 7 in the morning and a logistics facility in Newark that had been running for 14 months and 26 hours that were already down to 25. He went to check on Ethan, who was asleep in the committed, total way of a person with a clear conscience. Logan stood in the doorway and looked at his son's face in the dark and felt the specific weight of what the next 24 hours required. Not fear, not reluctance, just the weight itself. The understanding that something was coming that he couldn't plan entirely around, that would require him to be the version of himself he'd spent 4 years trying to leave in a different life. He straightened Ethan's blanket. The kid didn't move. He went back to the kitchen and started planning. The Newark facility was a converted warehouse on a street with 3 other warehouses, the kind of block that existed in the industrial margins of every city. Functional, unremarkable, designed to be passed without looking. Logan drove past it at 11:30 that night without stopping, just getting the geography into his body the way you did, mapping exits and approaches and sightlines and the specific way the light fell or didn't fall at that hour. 2 guards at the front, probably more inside. camera coverage on the two visible corners. The loading dock in the back would have its own setup. He drove back through Newark and over the bridge and home. In 18 hours, the file would reach Okafor. In 20 hours, if the timing held, she'd have enough to move through legitimate channels. The question was what happened in the 2 hours in between, the gap between the information landing and the response being fast enough to matter. In that gap, the network would still be operational. Maddox would still be reachable. And if anything triggered early, if Calloway noticed something wrong, if Corrigan had any visibility into Okafor's communications, the facility would empty, and the trail would go cold, and they'd be back to the beginning with Victoria still exposed. Logan sat with that gap and thought about it for a long time. Then he made a call to Marcus Teal, and they talked for 20 minutes, and when he hung up, he felt the particular settled quality of a decision made. Not comfortable, not easy, just settled. The kind of decision that doesn't feel good or bad, but simply feels like the only door that opens in the direction you need to go. He slept 4 hours. Set an alarm for 5:30. When it went off, he lay still for exactly 1 minute, listening to the apartment, confirming the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. Then he got up. At 5:45 in the morning, Logan woke Ethan. This was not a normal thing. Ethan's relationship with early mornings was one of principled resistance, and being pulled from sleep before 6 a.m. on a school day registered somewhere between personal injury and philosophical injustice. He sat up with his hair going in 4 directions and looked at Logan with the specific expression of a person who had not yet fully committed to being conscious. "What?" Ethan said. Not a question, a position statement. "We're going to Uncle Danny's for a couple of days. Get dressed." Ethan looked at the window. Dark outside. He looked back at Logan. "It's still night." "It's morning. It just looks like night." Logan set clothes on the end of the bed. 5 minutes. "I already packed your bag." Something in the way Logan said it, not urgent, not alarmed, just completely certain, crossed whatever threshold Ethan used to assess whether something required argument. He looked at his father for another second, reading that face the way he'd described 2 nights ago, the math that didn't go on paper. Then he picked up the clothes. "Is this because of the restaurant thing?" Ethan said. Logan stopped at the doorway. "What do you know about the restaurant thing?" "Marcus at school showed me the video. Everyone's seen it." Ethan pulled his shirt over his head. "He said the guy in the apron was probably military because of how he moved. I didn't say anything." Logan stood in the doorway for a moment. 8 years old. His son was 8 years old and had watched the video and sat with that information for 3 days without saying anything, carrying it around school and through homework and dinner and bedtime, like it was just another thing he was figuring out on his own. "Yeah," Logan said. "It's because of the restaurant thing." Ethan nodded, pulling on his shoe. "Okay." Then without looking up, "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes." "Promise?" Logan crossed the room and crouched down so they were at eye level. Ethan's shoelace was tied wrong, the kind of knot that would come undone in 20 minutes, and Logan retied it without making it a thing. "I promise I'm going to be as careful as I know how to be," which is pretty careful. Ethan considered this. "That's not exactly a promise." "No," Logan agreed. "It's the honest version." His son looked at him with those dark eyes, and something passed between them that didn't have a name. The specific understanding between a child and a single parent who has never lied to him even when lying would have been easier. Ethan nodded once, the way he nodded when he was done processing something and had filed it. "Okay," he said. "Can we stop for breakfast?" "Yeah, we can stop for breakfast." He dropped Ethan at Danny's by 7:15. Marie had coffee ready and didn't ask anything, and Ethan was already at the kitchen table eating toast with Danny's youngest by the time Logan said goodbye. He stood in the doorway, and Ethan looked up and gave him a small wave. Not worried, not performing calm, just actually okay, in the way that children who have been told the truth tend to be more okay than the ones who've been told everything is fine. Logan drove toward the city. Victoria was already at the Catskills house by the time he'd arranged the logistics the previous night. She'd driven up herself, no driver, a rental car paid in cash through an intermediary that Garrett had arranged. She'd texted him one word at 7:48, "Here." He'd sent back, "Stay put until I contact you." She hadn't replied to that, which he took as agreement. The drive to Newark took 40 minutes in early morning traffic. Marcus was already positioned 2 blocks from the warehouse when Logan arrived, sitting in a gray Subaru that looked like it belonged on that street, drinking coffee from a gas station cup with the particular patience of someone who had done a lot of waiting in cars. Logan got in the passenger side. 3 on site, Marcus said, without preamble. 2 at the front, 1 doing rotation on the south side every 22 minutes. Loading dock and back has a camera, but I haven't seen physical coverage. Could be a 4th inside, could be more. He handed Logan a coffee. Voss is on the north approach. He's been there since 4. Logan looked at the warehouse. From this distance, it was just a building. Corrugated metal cladding, high narrow windows, a loading dock with a roll-up door. The kind of structure that existed to not be noticed. Maddox, Logan said. Voss clocked a vehicle registered to a shell company linked to his post-arrest financial disclosures arriving at 10:40 last night, still inside. Marcus took a drink of his coffee. He's in there. Logan checked his watch. The email to Okafor was set to send in 15 hours. That was the timeline. Whatever happened in the next 15 hours either set the conditions for a clean law enforcement response, or it didn't. And if it didn't, Maddox walked out of that warehouse tonight and disappeared into whatever operational structure had been rebuilt around him, and the next attempt on Victoria would be better planned and better resourced than the one at Meridian. Logan said. Marcus looked at him. I don't need to go in. I need Maddox to know that what he's been running is finished. Logan looked at the building. And I need that documented in a way that holds up. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You want to talk to him? I want him to understand the scope of what I have before Okafor's team executes a warrant. If he's rational, and men in his position usually are, underneath everything, because irrational people don't manage 14 months of operational continuity. He'll understand that the choice is cooperation or a situation where every link in his chain goes down with him, including the federal asset. And if he's not rational, then we'll deal with that. Logan set the coffee in the cup holder. But I want to try this first, because if he lawyers up the moment law enforcement arrives, the $400 million stays buried, Corrigan stays protected, and 6 months from now a different version of this starts over with a different target. Marcus looked at the warehouse for a long moment. This is an unusual strategy. Most things that work are. They sat with that for a minute. A truck moved down the street and turned before it reached the warehouse. The neighborhood was waking up slowly around them. A light on in a second-floor window of the building across the way. A man walking a dog a block north. The ordinary morning activity of a place that didn't know what was happening on its block. How do you want to do it? Marcus said. Front door, Logan said. Direct. No pretense. Marcus made a sound that was not quite disbelief and not quite admiration. You understand these are people who already tried to kill her once. I understand that. Logan opened the door. Stay on the south approach. If I'm not out in 30 minutes, call Okafor's direct line. It's in the file I sent you last night, and tell her to move on the Newark address immediately. Logan, he stopped. Don't try to be reasonable with people who have decided you're a problem, Marcus said. If it goes sideways in there, don't negotiate your way out. Just move. Logan looked at him. 30 minutes, he said. He walked toward the warehouse. The 2 men at the front door saw him coming from 40 yards and did not look relaxed about it. They were both large in the way that was about function rather than aesthetics. And the way they shifted when he approached told him they'd been briefed on what had happened at Meridian because there was a specific quality to the attention, not routine security attention, but the attention of people who had been told to watch for a particular kind of problem. He stopped 8 feet from them and held both hands slightly out from his sides. Not raised, that was a gesture of surrender, and he wasn't surrendering, just visible. My name is Logan Mercer, he said. I have a file that documents every operational connection between this facility, Carl Maddox, Reed Calloway, and a federal agent named Corrigan. In 15 hours, that file goes to an NYPD detective who's been building a case against this network for 2 months and has been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation. He paused. I'm not here to threaten. I'm here to give Maddox the option of a conversation before that happens. That option expires when I leave. After that, it's just the file and whatever law enforcement does with it. The 2 men looked at each other. One of them, the one on the left, who had a phone already in his hand, stepped back slightly and made a call. Short. 40 seconds. He listened more than he spoke. He put the phone away. Inside, he said. They didn't search him. He thought about what that meant. either confidence or carelessness, and neither version made him feel particularly secure, and walked through the door. The interior of the warehouse was not what the exterior suggested. The front third of the space was staged to look like storage. Industrial shelving, palletized inventory that appeared legitimate from a distance. Behind that, a partition wall, and behind that, a working operations space. Servers. Monitors. A long table covered in documents and laptops. 4 more people, all of whom looked at Logan the way you look at something that has walked into a room where it absolutely should not be and has not, apparently, understood that. Carl Maddox was at the far end of the table. He was in his mid-50s, compact, with gray at his temples, and the kind of posture that came from military background and had never fully gone civilian. I was looking at Logan with an expression that was hard to read. Not anger, not fear, something more like the careful attention of a man doing rapid calculation. "Mercer," he said. "Maddox. You walked in here alone. Yes. That's either very confident or very stupid. I've been told it's sometimes hard to tell the difference." Logan stopped at the near end of the table. He didn't sit. "You've seen the file summary that I sent to your contact protocol 40 minutes ago." Maddox glanced very briefly at the man to his left. Just a flicker, involuntary. And that confirmed what Logan had suspected, which was that sending a truncated version of the file through Calloway's third device contact number, an hour before he arrived, had been the right call. It established that Logan had the routing, which meant Maddox already understood the scope of the exposure before Logan said a word. "You've been busy," Maddox said. 4 days, Logan said. "The full file is more comprehensive than what I sent. Financial flows, communication metadata, employment histories, the Chicago dissolution connections, Corrigan's case records, the Maddox release paperwork." He put his hands flat on the table. "The woman you're trying to kill doesn't have what you think she has. She handed over everything she found during the original investigation. She doesn't have endpoint documentation for the $400 million because the endpoint records weren't in the acquisition data she accessed. She's not a threat to the money." Maddox looked at him without expression. "That's a convenient thing for you to say. It's also true, which you could verify if you looked at the prosecution record carefully instead of assuming she withheld documentation." Logan held his gaze. "You killed 3 people over the past 18 months, 2 witnesses from the original investigation and a forensic accountant who was building the secondary case. I have the connection threads on all 3. He paused. "You contracted Meridian because you were afraid she had what the accountant had. She doesn't. She never did. And you've spent significant resources and created significant exposure for a threat that didn't exist." Something moved in Maddox's face. Not much, but something. "The endpoint," Logan continued, "is documented in a separate records cache that the prosecution team still hasn't fully mapped. That cache doesn't include anything connected to Victoria Ashford. If you want the $400 million to stay buried, the worst thing you can do is keep targeting the one person whose continued cooperation with law enforcement is the most visible and most watched." He straightened up. "Leave her alone and you have time. Keep going after her, and in 15 hours you have nothing, because everything I've built goes to a detective who will use it, and there's no version of that where the network survives intact." The warehouse was very quiet. Someone shifted behind Logan, not threatening, just the reflexive movement of a person held still for too long, and he registered it without turning. Maddox looked at him for a long time. The calculation was visible, almost, the way weather is visible in a sky that's changing. He was a man who had survived in a specific way for a long time by being better at calculating outcomes than the people around him, and Logan watched him run the numbers on this particular problem and arrive at the same place Logan had arrived 3 days ago when he'd first understood the full shape of it. "Corrigan," Maddox said finally, "goes down with the file unless he cooperates. That's not my decision. That's arithmetic." Another long silence. "You're asking me to walk away from a contract. I'm telling you the contract is based on a false premise, and the cost of executing it exceeds any conceivable benefit." Logan kept his voice flat. "That's a business calculation, not a moral one. I'm not asking you to have a change of heart." The corner of Maddox's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile. "You're an unusual person, Mercer." "I've heard that." "What's your guarantee? That the file doesn't go anyway?" "There's no guarantee. You're calculating on my word, which is all I have to offer." Logan met his eyes. But you're also calculating on the fact that I walked in here alone and told you my name and gave you the option instead of just sending the file and letting the process handle it. That tells you something about how I operate. Maddox looked at the table, at the monitors, at something that wasn't in the room. Calloway, he said. He'll be picked up by law enforcement within the next 48 hours, regardless. That's already in motion. Logan paused. He's the one who walked into your network. What happens to him isn't something I can change. Corrigan. Same. Maddox was quiet for almost a full minute. Nobody in the room moved. The servers hummed. Outside, somewhere, a truck passed, and the building's metal skin resonated faintly with the vibration. The woman stays untouched, Maddox said finally. It wasn't agreement. It was a man recalculating a position out loud. Yes, Logan said. Another silence. Then Maddox looked up. Get out of my building, Mercer. Logan walked out the way he'd come in. The two men at the front door watched him leave and didn't move. He walked the full block before his shoulders fully released the tension he'd been holding since he stepped through that door. And even then, it was a partial release, the kind that comes from a situation resolved to a manageable level rather than resolved cleanly, which was the only kind of resolution available to him at this point. Marcus was at the corner. He'd moved position, closer now, in the shadow of a loading bay across the street. 31 minutes, Marcus said. Sorry. You're bleeding. Logan looked down. The bandage on his forearm from the meridian cut had come through his jacket sleeve, so not a lot, just a dark stain at the cuff. He'd knocked it on the edge of the door frame going in, hadn't noticed until now. It's fine. It's not fine, but okay. Marcus fell into step beside him toward the car. How did it go? He'll stand down, probably. Logan looked at the street. The file goes to Okafor on schedule. Calloway and Corrigan are already in the mechanism. Maddox knows that. And he just accepted that. He accepted that continuing costs more than stopping. It's not a moral position. It's an exit calculation. Logan got into the passenger seat. Whether he holds to it is something we'll know in the next few days. But right now he's looking at a file that documents enough to take down the entire remaining structure, and the only version of the next 6 months where he has any operational future is the one where Victoria Ashford is not a target. Marcus started the car. You think he believed you? About her not having the endpoint documentation? I think he's smart enough to check, and when he checks, he'll find out it's true. Logan looked out the window. That's the only part of this that I couldn't manufacture. It had to be actually true. And it is. Yes. He leaned his head back against the seat. It is. He called Victoria at 9:45 from the road. She answered on the first ring again. He was starting to understand that this was just how she answered phones, immediately, fully present, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this call, which she probably had. It's done, he said. A pause. Define done. The file goes to Okafor in 12 hours. The network's exposed enough that continuing to operate at full capacity isn't viable. Calloway and Corrigan will be in federal custody within 48 hours, probably sooner. He paused. The direct threat to you is substantially reduced. Substantially. Nothing is absolute. But the calculation that made you a target has changed. He watched the New Jersey landscape slide past the window. Stay where you are until tomorrow morning. Okafor may want to speak with you. I'll let you know when that's confirmed and it's safe to move. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the Catskills in the background. Actual quiet, the kind that didn't exist in the city. Wind in trees, a bird somewhere. You went to the warehouse, she said. He hadn't told her he was going to do that. He'd described the plan only to the level she needed to know, which had not included that part. Yes, he said, alone. Marcus was on the perimeter. That's not what alone means. Her voice wasn't angry. It was the voice of someone working hard at not being angry because they understood the anger wasn't entirely fair, but couldn't quite get rid of it either. You could have, Logan, if they had simply decided they didn't, but they could have. Yes. He didn't try to minimize it. It was a calculated risk. The alternative was letting the file go without the conversation, which meant Maddox had no option but to keep running. Cornered operations don't stop. They adapt and try again. He paused. I needed him to have a door to walk out of. Another silence, longer this time. You're going to have to explain your logic to me at some point, she said. All of it. When this is over. Okay. I mean it. I know you mean it. He shifted the phone to his other ear. How are you doing, actually? A small pause, like the question surprised her. I've been sitting on a porch looking at trees for 2 hours, which is not something I normally do. A beat. It's not terrible. The trees are very committed to being trees. He found himself almost smiling. That's usually how trees work. In the city, you forget they just stand there, doing nothing for decades. Another pause. I keep thinking about what you said, about Calloway sitting in my board meetings and knowing my assistant's daughter's name. Her voice shifted slightly. I'm not sure when I'll stop thinking about that. You probably won't stop thinking about it. You'll just get to a place where thinking about it doesn't change how you move through a room. He looked at the road. It takes a while. Is that from experience? Different circumstance. Same basic problem. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. I'll call you when Okafor confirms. Stay on the porch. The trees won't bother you. Lowest bar I've been set in recent memory, she said, and hung up. The file reached Detective Okafor at 9 p.m., exactly as scheduled. Logan knew because she called the contact number he'd included in the message at 9:14, and when he answered, she said without preamble, I need to know how you got this. That's a long conversation, he said. Do you want to have it now, or do you want to read the file first? A pause. He could hear her breathing, the sound of papers, the background hum of what was probably a precinct. I've been reading it for 10 minutes, she said. I'm going to need another hour with it. Can we meet tonight? Tomorrow morning is better. I need to make sure certain people are moved to safe locations first. Moved. Her voice was careful. You've been running a parallel operation. I've been doing what needed to be done with the information available to me. He kept his voice even. The operation is finished. What I'm handing you is the basis for a legitimate law enforcement action that your department can own completely. I'm not asking for anything except that you move quickly, because the network will know the file exists within the next 12 hours. Another pause. Longer. Corrigan, she said. Yes. If he's in that file, he's in the file. Thoroughly. Logan leaned against the kitchen counter. That's going to be complicated for you. I understand that. But it also means you've been right for 5 weeks, and someone above you was wrong for reasons that aren't coincidental. He heard her exhale. It was the exhale of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told they were right about the weight. Not relief exactly, too complicated for relief, but a kind of grim vindication. Tomorrow morning, she said, 7 a.m., I'll text you the location. I'll be there. He set the phone down and stood in his kitchen and thought about everything that had been set in motion and couldn't be called back now, which was probably all of it from the moment he'd walked through a service door at Meridian 11 days ago. The specific trajectory of a series of choices, each one following from the last, each one narrowing the range of what came next until you arrived at exactly here. A kitchen in Carroll Gardens at 9:15 in the evening, everything in play, nothing resolved yet, waiting for morning. He called Danny. Ethan okay? He said. Asleep for an hour? He beat Ryan at Lego architecture twice and was extremely gracious about it. Danny paused. How are things on your end? Moving in the right direction. That's vague. It's what I've got right now. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Danny, thank you for all of it. Stop, Danny said, in the tone he used when Logan got anywhere near expressing gratitude for things that Danny considered simply what you did. You'd have done the same. I would have. Then stop thanking me and go do whatever you need to do. A pause. The kid drew you something, a robot. He says it's you. Logan closed his eyes for a second. Does the robot have legs? It does. Very good legs, apparently. He was specific about the legs being structurally accurate. That's Ethan. Yeah. A pause. Be careful, Logan. Working on it. He hung up and sat in the quiet for a while, not thinking exactly. Past a certain point, the thinking was done, and what remained was just the waiting, which was its own discipline. He'd never been especially good at waiting. He'd gotten better at it after Claire died because grief had that effect. It taught you to sit with things that couldn't be moved by effort, to be in a moment that wasn't going anywhere, regardless of how you felt about it. He thought about Claire sometimes in the specific way that had changed over 4 years. Not the raw thought that used to stop him mid-sentence, but the quieter one. The version where she was just there in his peripheral vision, present the way she'd always been present, the way Ethan carried her eyes and her jaw and her absolute commitment to sleep. He didn't talk about her much. Ethan asked sometimes careful, thoughtful questions, the way he approached most hard things, and Logan answered them as honestly as he could, which meant saying, "I miss her, and I think she would have liked this," and sometimes just yes, when Ethan asked if he was sad, because he was, and pretending otherwise would have been the one lie Ethan would have caught immediately. He didn't know what she would have made of the last 11 days. Probably a complicated mix of things. She'd known who he was, had known it before he did, in some ways, had said to him once, 2 months before the deployment that changed everything, that she worried less about what could happen to him than about who he would become if he kept going. She hadn't been wrong. She'd been precisely right, the way she usually was. And he'd been trying to figure out ever since what it meant to become someone different without becoming someone unrecognizable. He sat at the kitchen table until after midnight. Then he went to bed and slept 6 hours, properly, deeply, the way he could sleep when the active phase was over and the waiting was the only thing left. He met Okafor at a diner in Astoria at 7 the next morning. She was already there when he arrived, a mug of coffee in front of her and a tablet with his file open on the table. She was in her early 40s, with the kind of face that had been watching people lie to her for long enough that the default expression was a careful, neutral attention that didn't give much away. She looked at him when he sat down. "You're the man from the Meridian video," she said. "Yes." "You look different without the apron." "Most people do." She almost smiled, didn't quite get there. "Walk me through the Callaway connection, from the beginning. I've read it. I want to hear you say it." He walked her through it. She asked precise questions and didn't interrupt except when something needed clarification. And twice she made notes on a separate pad in shorthand he couldn't read. She was good at this, at absorbing complex information without getting tangled in the emotional reaction to it, which was its own skill and not one that everyone had. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Corrigan," she said. Third time she'd led with his name. Logan was starting to understand that Corrigan was the part she kept returning to. Not because it surprised her, but because saying it out loud was still an active process. "Yes," he said. "He's been my supervisor's supervisor's point of contact on the Veltri follow-up since the arrest." She looked at her coffee. "Every time I tried to escalate the Maddox release flag, it went through a channel that touched him somewhere." She paused. "I didn't have proof. I had a feeling and a pattern and a very unproductive set of conversations with people who kept telling me to focus on my active caseload. Now you have proof. Now I have your word and a documented file from an unofficial investigation with no chain of custody." She looked at him directly. "Which is not nothing, but it's also not a clean hand." "No," he agreed. "But it's a foundation, and you've been building toward this for 5 weeks, which means you have your own documentation of the pattern. Combined with what I'm giving you, there's enough to get a warrant and enough to justify going around Corrigan to a separate federal chain." She looked at the tablet, at the file, at something in the middle distance. "The Newark facility," she said. "Maddox. He'll cooperate, not out of conscience, out of calculation. He understands the exposure. His cooperation is what gets you the full financial trail, including the $400 million. You spoke to him." "Yes. Alone." "People keep saying that like it changes the outcome." She looked at him steadily. "It changes my liability picture quite a bit." A pause. "Off the record, not for any official purpose, are you telling me that Carl Maddox is going to come in voluntarily?" "I'm telling you he's not going to run, and that when you arrive with a warrant, the people inside that building are going to understand that resisting is not in their interest." Logan looked at her. "I can't promise you a clean surrender. I can tell you the calculation has been made by the person running the operation, and the math came out the same way it comes out for rational people." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that a waiter came by and refilled both coffees without either of them acknowledging him. "Victoria Ashford," she said finally. "Safe. Waiting for my call." "I'll need to speak with her." "I know. She knows." He wrapped his hands around the fresh coffee. "She's been ready to cooperate since the beginning. She was ready to cooperate at Meridian before the table got thrown across the room." Okafor nodded slowly. She closed the tablet cover. She looked like someone who had made a decision that had been building for a while and had just now become unavoidable. Not reluctant, exactly, just aware of the weight of the next step. "I'm going to make 2 calls," she said. "One to a federal prosecutor I trust who is not connected to Corrigan's supervisory chain. One to my sergeant, who I also trust, and who has been watching me bang my head against this wall for 5 weeks and is going to have a very specific reaction to what I'm about to tell him." She picked up her phone. "I'd like you to stay here while I make these calls." "Okay. After that, I'm going to need you to come with me and explain this file to people who have the authority to act on it." She looked at him. "This is going to be a long day." "I know." She made the first call. Logan drank his coffee and looked out the window at Astoria waking up. The morning commuters, the bodega on the corner with its newspapers out front, the ordinary, purposeful motion of a city that didn't know, as cities never knew, what was about to shift inside it. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "Still on the porch. The trees are very consistent." He sent back, "That's trees for you. Moving soon. Stay put a little longer." Her response came in 30 seconds. "Okay. Also, there's a woodpecker, extremely loud. I respect the commitment." He put the phone face down on the table and listened to Okafor's voice, measured, precise, building the case in the careful, sequential way that law worked when it was working right. And thought about a woman on a porch in the Catskills having an unplanned education in what trees did all day, and an 8-year-old in Greenpoint drawing a robot with structurally accurate legs, and the specific ordinary quality of both images in the middle of everything that had been the past 4 days. Okafor finished her call. Started the second. Logan ordered eggs he didn't especially want and ate them anyway, because the day was going to be long and he'd learned a long time ago that you ate when the opportunity presented itself. The woodpecker on Victoria's porch was apparently still at it when she texted him again at 8:45. He looked at that text and felt something he didn't name, in the way he'd learned to feel things without naming them until he was ready, which was sometimes a long time. The day moved forward the way days do. Not clean, not simple, but forward. The warrant for the Newark facility was executed at 2:17 in the afternoon. Logan wasn't there when it happened. He was in a federal prosecutor's office on the 14th floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, going through the file for the 3rd time with 2 attorneys and a senior FBI supervisor named Hartwell, who had been pulled in specifically because of the Corrigan connection and who had the face of a man who had not expected his Thursday to go this way. Okafor was across the table. She'd been awake for at least 30 hours based on the quality of her coffee consumption and showed no particular signs of stopping. Logan's phone buzzed at 2:31. "Marcus, facility secured. 7 in custody, including M, no shots fired." He set the phone face down on the table and kept talking about the communication metadata. It took him another 4 hours to get out of that building. By the time he walked onto the street, the light had gone, the particular flat gold of late afternoon in October, and the city was doing the thing it did in that hour. Everyone moving slightly faster, slightly more purposeful, the end-of-day energy that felt like a collective exhale. He stood on the sidewalk and called Victoria. "It's done," he said, for the second time in 2 days. This time, the word meant something different. This time, there was nothing provisional about it. A silence on her end. Not the calculating silence of someone processing implications, just silence, the kind that follows when a thing you've been braced against for a long time finally stops being a threat, and your body doesn't immediately know what to do with the absence of that weight. "Maddox," she said, "in custody. 7 people total from the facility. Calloway was picked up at his apartment at noon. Corrigan is currently being interviewed by an independent federal team, Hartwell's people. No connection to his supervisory chain." Logan walked slowly along the sidewalk, not going anywhere in particular. Okafor has the full financial documentation from Maddox's servers. The $400 million is traceable now. It's going to take time to fully unwind, but the thread is there. And Corrigan. He lawyered up within 20 minutes, which is expected. But the documentation doesn't require his cooperation. It stands on its own. He paused. He's finished either way. Another silence. He heard the wind in trees. She was still on the porch, or back on it. "Victoria," he said, "I'm here." Her voice was even, but he was starting to be able to hear what was underneath the evenness, the things she controlled by habit rather than by absence. "I've been sitting here thinking about the past 3 years, about how many times Calloway sat across from me and I thought he was an ally." A pause. I'm angry. I know anger is a reasonable response, and I know it'll pass. Right now, I'm just angry. That's the right response, he said. Is it? Because it feels like wasted energy. I can't go back and see it differently. I can't. She stopped. I'm good at being rational about most things. This one I'm having some trouble being rational about. You don't have to be rational about it yet. He stopped walking. He was at the edge of a small plaza with benches and a few trees, the kind of urban green space that appeared in Midtown like an afterthought. You can be angry for a while. It's not wasted. It's what anger is for. A pause. That's unexpectedly not terrible advice from someone who appears to process things by doing them instead of feeling them. I feel them, he said. I'm just slow about it. She made a sound that was close to a laugh. Not quite, but in the vicinity. When can I come back? Tomorrow. Okafor wants to meet with you in the morning. Your formal statement. The prosecution team will need your testimony again, probably depositions over the next few weeks. But the active threat is resolved. He sat down on one of the benches. You can go home. Home, she said, like she was testing the word after some time away from it. Yeah. A longer pause. Logan, thank you. I know that's not sufficient for what you actually did, but I don't have a word that is. He looked at the trees in the plaza. They were doing what trees did, standing in the particular committed way that Victoria had apparently spent 2 days observing and developing opinions about. The leaves were mostly gone by now, just the last ones hanging on. You don't owe me anything, he said. That's not true, but I'll let it go for now. Another pause. Go get your son. He did. Ethan came back from Danny's with a backpack full of things that had migrated into it during his 2-day stay. A Lego piece, a drawing, one of Danny's youngest kid's socks that had apparently attached itself to Ethan's belongings through a process Ethan couldn't fully explain. He came through the door of their apartment and dropped the backpack and immediately went to check on his room as if it might have changed in his absence, which it hadn't, which appeared to satisfy him. Logan made dinner, real dinner, not the standing at the counter version, pasta with actual sauce from scratch, the way Claire used to make it on Sundays. A recipe Logan had reconstructed from memory over about 6 attempts the first year after she died and had gotten approximately right by the second year. Ethan sat at the table and talked about Danny's kids and the Lego project and a show he'd watched, and Logan stood at the stove and listened and said the right things and felt the specific relief of ordinariness, of this kitchen, this noise, this kid in this chair. After dinner, Ethan pushed his plate aside and looked at Logan with the serious expression that meant something was coming that had been in progress for a while. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Yeah. The restaurant, the video. He picked at the edge of the placemat. Were you scared? Logan sat down across from him. He thought about it genuinely, the way Ethan's questions deserved to be thought about. Not in the moment, he said. In the moment, there wasn't room for it. After a little, he paused. Mostly I was scared later. About you. Ethan looked up. About me? I wasn't even there. I know, but the people involved, there was a version of things where they could have tried to use you to get to me. That scared me. He kept his voice level. That's why I took you to Uncle Danny's. Ethan processed this with the focused silence he used for hard things. But nothing happened to me. Nothing happened to you. Because you handled it. Because a lot of people worked on it together, me included. Logan looked at his son. I want to be honest with you about something. Ethan waited. I used to do work, a long time ago, before you were old enough to remember, that involved situations like what happened at the restaurant. That's why I was able to handle it. He paused. I stopped doing that work because I wanted to be here. With you. Fully. He looked at his hands on the table. The last few days were an exception, because there wasn't another option. But my life is here. This table. You. That's not changing. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. I know that, he said. I know you know. I wanted to say it anyway. His son nodded slowly. Then he picked up his fork and stabbed the last piece of pasta on his plate and ate it with the satisfied air of someone whose important questions had been answered adequately. The robot I drew is on the fridge at Uncle Danny's, he said. I forgot to bring it. We'll get it back. It's a good drawing. The legs are very accurate. I heard. Ethan carried his plate to the sink without being asked, which happened maybe 40% of the time, and was therefore remarkable enough that Logan noted it internally. Then he went to brush his teeth, and Logan sat at the table in the quiet kitchen and felt something that didn't have a sharp name. Not happiness exactly, but something in that territory. The kind of feeling that's made of small, specific things rather than one large thing. The scratch of a chair on linoleum. The smell of sauce still on the stove. A kid's footsteps in the hallway. He sat with it and didn't try to make it into more than it was. The weeks that followed were not simple, which was never going to be the case, and Logan hadn't expected otherwise. Victoria's formal statement took 3 sessions. The prosecution team, the legitimate one, rebuilt around Hartwell, now that Corrigan had been suspended pending investigation, was thorough in the way that thorough people are when they've been handed something solid and want to make it airtight. Logan gave his own statement twice, the second time with an attorney present that Garrett had recommended, and navigated the question of the Newark conversation with Maddox in the careful way that Okafor had helped him frame it. Not an interrogation, not a confrontation, a communication of information. The distinction mattered legally. Whether it fully held would depend on how the prosecution decided to use the resulting cooperation, and that was not Logan's decision to make. Maddox cooperated. Not immediately, and not without his own attorney extracting significant concessions, but within 10 days he was providing financial documentation that mapped the $400 million network in more detail than anyone had managed in 18 months of federal investigation. It turned out Victoria had been right that she didn't have the endpoint data. The records that mattered had been in a separate server cache that Maddox's team had maintained completely apart from the Veltri acquisition structure. She'd never had access to it. The network had spent 3 years and significant resources trying to silence someone who couldn't have exposed them even if she'd wanted to. Logan thought about that sometimes, about how much damage fear could do. Not the fear of a real threat, but the fear of a perceived one, the way an organization built on secrecy and money could convince itself that a woman who had told the truth once would keep finding ways to tell it until everything collapsed and destroy itself trying to prevent a disaster that wasn't coming. Calloway pled out in the second week. Corrigan's case was slower and more complicated, tangled in jurisdictional arguments and supervised release conditions that would take months to fully resolve. But the evidence was solid, and everyone who'd looked at it said it was solid. And Logan had learned to make a certain peace with the timelines of institutions that moved at their own pace regardless of urgency. He went back to work. Not the kitchen job at Meridian, that chapter was obviously closed, but a contracting job in Queens that a former colleague had referred him to, 3 days a week, steady enough to cover things while he figured out what came next. He picked up Ethan from school. He fixed the water stain in the hallway ceiling, which turned out to require more extensive work than he'd expected, and took an entire Saturday and resulted in a patch that was functional, but visually suggested a different color paint had been used at some point, which it had. He ordered takeout on Friday nights and watched the robot cartoon with Ethan, and fell asleep on the couch twice with his son leaning against his arm, which Ethan found deeply funny both times. Victoria called on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after everything. He was washing dishes when his phone rang, and he answered it with one hand and the other still wet. "I have a proposition," she said, "and I want you to hear it before you say no." "I haven't said no yet." "You were about to. I can hear it getting ready." She paused, and he could tell she'd thought carefully about how to say this. "I'm restructuring my security operations from the ground up. Everything, vendor relationships, internal protocols, the entire framework that Calloway designed and that I now have to dismantle and rebuild because I can't trust any of it." A pause. "I want someone to design the new framework, not to run it as an employee inside my company. As an independent contractor, your own terms, your own hours, project-based. You'd have full authority over the architecture and no obligation beyond the scope of each engagement." Logan dried his hands on the dish towel. "You're describing a consulting arrangement." "I'm describing exactly that. Because you told me in Danny's kitchen that you didn't want to be inside anyone's organization, and I believe you, and I'm not asking you to be." She paused. "I'm asking you to do work you're good at, on terms that work for your life, for a rate that I guarantee is better than kitchen contracting in Queens." He stood in his kitchen. He could hear Ethan in his room, the low sound of the cartoon, something exploding in whatever episode was currently running. Why me specifically? He said. You could hire any number of qualified... Because I've seen you work, she said simply, and because I trust you, which is not something I say without knowing exactly what it means and what it costs to lose. A pause. And because you understand something that most security consultants don't. You understand that the biggest vulnerabilities aren't technical, they're human. He didn't answer immediately. He looked out the kitchen window at the street below, the same view he'd stood at 100 times in the last 4 years, while thinking through things that needed to be thought through. My schedule has to stay flexible, he said. School pickup, Ethan's appointments, anything that comes up with him, that takes precedence, non-negotiable. Understood. I'll need to vet any team I work with independently. No inherited personnel from your current structure until I've cleared them myself. I expected that. And I work remote by default, on-site when the work requires it, not as a standing arrangement. Fine. A pause. Is that a yes? He thought about it for another moment. Not about the work. He'd known he was going to say yes to this before she'd finished the first sentence, which said something about the nature of decisions that feel inevitable. He thought about why it felt inevitable, about what it meant to be good at something and spend 4 years doing other things instead, about whether the choice to stay invisible was really protecting Ethan or whether it was protecting the version of himself that didn't have to find out whether he could be a certain kind of person again without losing the rest of what he'd built. Yeah, he said. That's a yes. A pause. The quiet that came after something landed. Good, she said. Then, how's Ethan? He's watching cartoons. A robot just exploded, I think. The robot show. He mentioned it at Danny's. Logan blinked. You talked to Ethan? He called me. A pause. I didn't know he had my number either. I think he got it from Danny. He wanted to ask if I was okay after the Catskills and to tell me that you were also okay in case I was worried. She sounded like she was smiling, the kind of smile that had arrived when she wasn't expecting it. He was very official about it, very thorough. Logan looked at the hallway. At the closed door behind which his son was apparently running communications operations without briefing anyone. I'll talk to him about appropriate use of contact information, he said. Please don't. She paused. He's a good kid, Logan. He's a really good kid. Yeah, Logan said. I know. A month after that, Victoria met Ethan officially, in a context that wasn't Danny's kitchen or a borrowed house in the mountains, but a Saturday afternoon in Carroll Gardens, a neighborhood she'd never had reason to visit before, and which she navigated with the slight careful energy of someone in genuinely new territory. She showed up at the apartment with takeout bags from a place she'd researched, which Ethan discovered meant she'd asked Logan's assistant what he liked and then cross-referenced it with reviews, which Ethan found both efficient and slightly hilarious and said so directly. You researched my lunch order? He said, looking at the bags. I wanted to get it right, she said. He considered this with a seriousness that suggested he was evaluating the methodology. That's actually a good system, he said. Dad just guesses. I get it right most of the time, Logan said from the kitchen. You got it wrong on Tuesday. You didn't specify. I shouldn't have to specify that I don't like mushrooms in the soup. That's a baseline expectation. Victoria laughed. An actual laugh, uncontrolled, the kind that came before you could decide whether to have it, which Ethan found gratifying in the way that 8-year-olds find it gratifying when an adult responds to them with genuine rather than polite amusement. He handed her the drawing from Danny's fridge, the robot with the accurate legs, and explained the structural choices in more detail than Logan had heard previously, which meant either he'd done additional thinking on it or he was editing for audience. They ate at the kitchen table. Victoria and Ethan talked about schools and cartoons, and whether robots could theoretically be structurally similar to humans, or whether the requirements were too different, which became a 20-minute conversation that Logan mostly listened to while eating, watching his son explain load-bearing principles to a billionaire CEO who was asking genuine follow-up questions and meant them. After lunch, Ethan excused himself with the directness of someone who had decided he'd done the social portion of the afternoon and could now return to his primary interests, and disappeared into his room. Logan and Victoria sat at the table with the remains of lunch between them and the particular comfortable quiet of people who had been through enough together that silence didn't need to be managed. He's going to be interesting when he grows up, Victoria said. He's interesting now, Logan said. It's exhausting. She smiled. You love it. Every minute of it. He looked at the hallway. He's the only thing I've been certain about in the last 4 years. Everything else has been, he paused, improvised. She looked at him steadily. You're pretty good at improvising. I've had practice. He met her eyes. You're different than I thought you'd be. When I first saw you at that table at Meridian. What did you think I'd be? I don't know, someone who needed to be managed more, who'd be harder to level with. He paused. You're not like that. I used to be more like that, she said. Before the testimony. Before... She looked at the table. Before I understood what it cost other people to help me. The prosecutors. The FBI agents who weren't Corrigan. The people who put their careers on the line to make the case hold. She paused. Knowing what things cost changes how you receive them. Yeah, he said. It does. She looked. There was something in her face that was open in a way that it hadn't been that first night in Danny's kitchen. Not unguarded exactly, but less defended. The way a person looks when they've decided that the wall isn't doing the job they'd thought it was doing, and the exhaustion of maintaining it outweighs whatever it was protecting. He recognized that look. He'd been working on his own version of it for a while. They didn't talk about what was between them that afternoon because there was no need to. Some things exist before they're named, and what mattered on that Saturday was just the table, and the afternoon, and Ethan's voice occasionally audible from his room, and two people sitting across from each other in a kitchen in Carroll Gardens, with enough room between them to be honest about what they'd both been through. The months that moved through the end of that year were not a restoration of anything that had existed before, because nothing was being restored. It was all new, the way things are when they're being built rather than recovered. Logan's consulting work took shape slowly and deliberately, the way he approached most things. He spent the first month auditing Victoria's existing security infrastructure, which was as compromised as he'd suspected and required a nearly complete rebuild. He brought in Marcus Teal for the physical security design and two former intelligence analysts that Garrett recommended for the digital side, and he ran them all through his own vetting process before they touched anything, which took time and which Victoria didn't rush. She was good at that, at understanding that the things she wanted to be done quickly would be done better slowly, which was a discipline that not everyone with her resources had managed to develop. She asked questions and expected real answers and pushed back when his answers weren't satisfying, which happened twice, and both times she was right to push back, which he told her. You don't have to say that, she said the second time. I know I don't have to. You were right. The redundancy on the server access protocols was insufficient. He looked at the diagram on his laptop. I'll fix it. I could have said it more diplomatically. Why would you? He looked up. I'd rather know I was wrong than be diplomatically managed into thinking I was right. She held his gaze for a moment. Most people prefer the diplomatic version. I'm not most people. No, she said, like she was confirming something she'd been thinking for a while. You're not. Okafor called in November to tell him that Corrigan had pled guilty to 2 counts of obstruction and a federal conspiracy charge, which was less than Logan had hoped for and more than he'd feared, which was how legal outcomes usually went. The sentencing was 4 months out. Calloway's cooperation agreement had yielded additional documentation on 3 other network contacts that the prosecution team hadn't previously identified, which meant the case was wider than anyone had initially mapped and was going to generate follow-on investigations for years. This is the part that doesn't make the news, Okafor told him. 1 arrest, 1 conviction, and then 5 years of people pulling threads in rooms nobody's paying attention to. I know, Logan said. Is that frustrating? Deeply. A pause. But it's also how it works, and the threads are there because of the file. So. She didn't say thank you exactly, but it was in the sentence somewhere. He told Victoria about Corrigan's plea over coffee. They'd started doing that, meeting for coffee when the week's consulting work required a check-in, which it usually did, and which had gradually become less about the work and more about the habit of it. She received the news with the controlled expression she used for things that weren't entirely satisfying but were better than the alternative. 4 months to sentencing, she said. Yes. I'll have to be there. Probably. She looked at her coffee. There's a part of me that wants to feel something definitive about all of it, about Veltri and Calloway and Corrigan and the whole 3 years. She paused. But I mostly just feel tired, and then a little guilty about feeling tired instead of something bigger. Tired is honest, Logan said. The big feelings come later, usually when you're not expecting them. She looked up. Is that from experience? He thought about Claire, about the first 6 months after, when he'd functioned on a kind of shocked competence, doing everything right and feeling very little. And then the feeling that had arrived one afternoon when Ethan was 2.5 and had fallen asleep on Logan's chest, and Logan had sat still for an hour because he didn't want to move him. And the feeling that came in that hour had been so large and so late that he hadn't known what to do with it except sit there. From experience, he said. She nodded slowly, accepting that without needing the rest of it. Ethan decided by December that Victoria was a person worth knowing, which he communicated not through any announcement, but through the accumulation of small evidence, asking when she was coming over again, showing her his Lego projects with the same level of detailed explanation he gave Logan, texting her once about the woodpecker at the Catskills house because he'd been thinking about it, apparently, which Victoria reported with the same expression she'd had on the phone, that smile that arrived before she could weigh in on whether to have it. It was not a simple thing, any of it. Logan knew that. Building something with someone who had come into his life through violence and crisis and the worst version of the world was not a simple foundation. And there were things they were still figuring out. How much of himself to let forward, how much she was still managing the reflex to keep people at a distance that success and threat had installed over years. How the logistics of two lives built separately could be arranged around each other without forcing what wasn't ready. But simple had never been the point. Simple was what you told yourself you wanted when you didn't have anything at all. What he had now was real and imperfect and present, which was the only version of things that had ever mattered. He proposed on a Wednesday evening in February, in the kitchen, because that was where everything real happened in his life. Not the grand moments, not the ones that photographed well, but the ones that were true. Ethan was in his room, but the door was cracked, which Logan had confirmed 15 minutes earlier. He'd given Ethan the ring that morning to hold, which Ethan had received with the gravity of someone being handed a significant operational responsibility. Victoria came for dinner. They ate, they talked, they did the dishes, which was something they'd gotten into the habit of. The ordinary shared rhythm of it, Logan washing and Victoria drying, and Ethan theoretically helping but mostly commentating. After dinner, Logan turned toward her and said her name in the way he said it when something was coming, and she set down the dish she was holding and looked at him. He said what he meant. Not a speech. He didn't have speeches in him. Just what was true. That he hadn't been looking for this. That it had arrived in the worst circumstances and turned into the best thing he hadn't known he needed. That she was someone he wanted to keep building toward. That Ethan had made his own decision on that front, and Logan was simply catching up. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway at the moment that seemed to have been coordinated with a precision that suggested he'd been listening, and held out the ring with both hands, and the expression of someone performing a role he'd been preparing for and taking very seriously. "I'm supposed to hold it till now," Ethan said. "I didn't look at it that much." Victoria looked at the ring, looked at Logan, looked at Ethan, who was watching her with those dark eyes and his mother's stubborn jaw, and waiting with complete patient confidence for whatever came next. "Yes," she said. The word came out before she'd finished deciding to say it, which was probably the right way for it to arrive. Ethan nodded once, satisfied, in the manner of someone whose project had concluded successfully. Then he asked if there was dessert, because the emotional register of the moment had reached its natural limit for him and he was moving forward, which made Logan laugh, a full, real laugh. And Victoria put her hand over her mouth and her eyes were bright, and the kitchen was warm and the dishes were still in the rack, and none of it was the version of the story anyone would have written on purpose. That was the thing Logan had figured out somewhere in the last 8 months, somewhere between Meridian and Newark and a porch in the Catskills and this kitchen on a Wednesday in February. You didn't get to plan the version of your life that mattered. You got to plan everything else. The logistics, the precautions, the frameworks and protocols and contingencies. And life put the actual things in your path sideways, at angles you hadn't expected, in the middle of moments you'd arranged for completely different purposes. 6 armed men had walked into a restaurant, and Logan had walked through a door. Not because he was a hero, not because he decided anything in advance, because there was a man's hand on a woman's arm, and he was already moving before the thinking started, and every decision that followed from that moment had been the same. Not chosen from a position of certainty, but made from the position of being already in motion, already past the point of managed distance, already involved in the life he was living instead of standing outside it, keeping himself safe from things that mattered. He had spent 4 years choosing the version of himself that stayed invisible because invisible felt like protection. What he'd learned, finally, was that it was just loneliness wearing protection's clothes. Ethan got his dessert. They ate ice cream at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, which was past a school night bedtime, and which Logan noted and which Ethan acknowledged, and which did not result in the ice cream being put away. Victoria sat across from them with her hand around a bowl that was a little too cold, and her eyes moving between Logan and Ethan with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they'd stopped believing they would ever get to. She didn't say that, but Logan could read it. He'd gotten better at reading things that weren't said, in this kitchen, with these two people. Later, after Ethan was in bed, complaining about tomorrow with the enthusiasm of someone who was actually fine about tomorrow, Logan and Victoria sat at the table with 2 mugs of tea and the quiet of a house where a child was asleep. "What do you think about," she asked, "when you're not working?" He thought about it genuinely. Ethan, mostly. Whether I'm doing the right things. Whether the things I can't give him are the things that will matter. He paused. "You, lately." She looked at him. "Whether this is something I'm handling right. Whether I'm present enough. I have a tendency to be in my head about things." "I know," she said. "I don't mind it. I have the same tendency." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I think about whether I'm going to be good at this. At the parts of it I haven't done." She paused. "I didn't have the kind of family that teaches you how this works. I've built everything from logic and effort. Logic and effort don't fully prepare you for an 8-year-old who researches structural engineering for fun. Nothing fully prepares you for Ian," Logan said. "You just respond to what's actually in front of you. He makes it clear what that is." She nodded. "He does?" A pause. "Logan?" He looked at her. "I know it wasn't a straight line, any of it." She held his gaze. "I know you had a life before and a person before, and that I'm not a replacement for any of that. I don't want to be." Her voice was careful, but not uncertain. "I just want to be what this actually is, whatever that is." He was quiet for a moment. "It's something I haven't had in a long time," he said. "Something worth being careful about." "Yes." She exhaled slightly. "I think so too." The tea was getting cold. Neither of them moved to heat it up. Outside, the February street was quiet in the way streets get late on a weeknight. Just the occasional car, just the city breathing at its nighttime pace. The kitchen light was the warm yellow of their particular fixture, the one that buzzed slightly when it first came on and then settled. This kitchen. These mugs. This table with the ring stain in one corner that had been there when Logan moved in, and that he'd never done anything about because it seemed like the kind of thing that just became part of a place eventually, that stopped being a flaw and became part of the texture. He thought about texture, about how the things that had been hard were also the things that had made everything that came after them possible. About how Ethan existed because of choices Logan had made when he was a different person, and Victoria sat at this table because of 6 men walking into a room and Logan walking out of a kitchen, and Claire was gone, and that would always be true, and he could carry that and still be here, fully here, in this kitchen on this night. You didn't stop having a past. You stopped being held hostage by the distance between your past and your present. That was the thing. That was what 4 years of careful invisibility had been teaching him without his permission, in the only way it could be taught, slowly, through accumulation, through a child's dark eyes, and a tooth that finally fell out, and a drawing with structurally accurate legs, through a woman who researched lunch orders and told him when he was wrong and sat on a porch watching trees with the focus of someone learning to be still for the first time. Through ordinary Wednesdays, through ice cream at 9 o'clock, through this. He reached across the table and she put her hand in his, and they sat in the kitchen while the street outside went quiet, and the house held its nighttime sounds around them, and the tea went cold, and there was nothing to plan for tonight, nothing to protect against, nothing to figure out before morning. Just this kitchen. Just this. And for the first time in a long time, that was exactly enough.